is eager to bring the Dracula remake to the screen. Both films will be rich in their interconnections. They will deal with the same terms from the opposite sides of the imaginary fence or spectrum. Dracula, the disquieting survival of a feudal social order into the era of the 19th century scientific rationalism. Frankenstein presents the horrors of that rationalism, deploring its tendency to interfere with the old-fashioned religiously fixed order of things. Dracula's sexuality will be associated with the return of this feudal anti-rational repression. In Frankenstein, sexual deviance is the byproduct of excessive rationality. So the films are linked. They're interconnected. Now, in contrast to romanticism, theatricality, or flashing flamboyance, the Hammer Dracula deploys a poetic, ironic realism. The eternal struggle between the forces of light and darkness will now blend with a class conflict element. The film has deep roots in British history and is a type of lurid representation of the aristocracy as an extraordinary, malevolent force. The aristocracy in England exercised considerable power, which the aristocratic class, should have lost long ago, but nevertheless still survives. The aristocracy, like the living dead, like the undead, has survived long after its apparent death, and feeds upon the desires and expectations of status-craving merchants and administrators. The Hammer Dracula is a dark fantasy film presented in historical terms. The key sequence, at least in respect to the class conflict, is when Van Helsing, Peter Cushing, and Arthur Michael Gough are outside guarding the home, while Dracula, Christopher Lee, is in fact living in the basement, and thus already inside the house, spending the night with Gough's wife Nina, Melissa Stribling. The film plays down Dracula, Lee's foreign ancestry, and the movie has no long voyages from Transylvania to England. Dracula's castle and the Homewood residence are within riding distance of each other. This is a budget-saving device, a budget-saving alteration from the Bram Stoker novel that makes Dracula a domestic English phenomenon and menace, accurately tuning into the political unconscious of the English middle class. The Hammer Dracula, which is known as the horror of Dracula in the United States, will be both condemned and acclaimed for the way it conveys the erotic aspects of the vampire's relationship with its female victims, especially in the scenes where Lucy, Carol Marsh, readies herself, somewhat apprehensively, but with real sensuality, for Count Dracula's nightly visits. But the most disturbing aspect of the film is the fact that the most sadistic and brutal actions are performed by the representatives of Christian morality, brutally driving the wooden stakes into the flesh of sexually aroused women, heedless of their screams and the gushing blood. The Christians in the film mercilessly drive pleasure and life out of the bodies of young and beautiful women, while leaving only the dry and shriveled remains of unsightly hags. Dracula makes Christopher Lee a star and puts Hammer Films securely on the map as the new kings of on-screen horror. Christopher Lee is at the core of the movie's effectiveness, and he gives a remarkable performance that is augmented by director Terence Fisher's subtle lighting and flawless tracking shots. Lee creates a demonic, sexual presence that has few rivals or any equals. Christopher Lee's Dracula is more directly a creature of the night. Lee drops much of the image of the suave continental gentleman that was perpetuated by the late, great Bela Lugosi. Lee has fangs, elongated canine teeth, and shows them to the audience when he attacks his female victims on camera. Lee develops the undead Count as a complex character who has a great positive qualities. Dracula has leadership, charm, intelligence, and sensuality, combined with a savage and ferocious streak. He is both a silent seducer as well as a red-eyed male fury. Under Lee, Dracula's hypnotic spell, prim Victorian ladies release their sexual inhibitions with unpinned hair and writhe orgasmically in his undead embrace. These erotically charged scenes are a type of foreplay or prelude as much to sexual intercourse as they are to vampiric contamination. This tension between arousal and horror that Fisher and Lee so effectively exploit generates an uneasiness that mounts slowly to panic and then terror. As Dracula, Lee takes his victims, the shots usually dissolve into the black of his cape, obscuring the fatal contamination. This equation of unbridled sexuality with depravity and death in the film remains just below the threshold of explicitness. Even Dracula's guest, Jonathan Harker, which I believe was played by John Van Epson, is taken in this manner, which suggests the bisexuality, the bisexual nature of vampirism. Now, Van Helsing, Peter Cushing, the nemesis of Dracula, is essentially the defender of the rational but repressed Victorian world order. Cushing plays the vampire hunter with a slight satiric edge. His weapons to fight evil, an assortment of wooden stakes, crucifixes, pious homilies, and the vast knowledge of vampire lore. In the movie's acrobatic finale, Van Helsing, Cushing, turns the tables on Count Dracula Lee by pursuing him up a flight of stairs and wrestling with the vampire like Jacob wrestles with his angel inside the vastness of Dracula's library. With a pull of the curtain, Cushing exposes Lee to sunlight, whereupon the centuries-old vampire crumbles into dust. It is an apocalyptic moment, and light, at least this time, has prevailed over the darkness. Director Terence Fisher has an uncanny sense of atmosphere, rhythm, and color. He uses poetic ellipses, swirling autumn leaves outside Lucy's window, for example, to indicate Dracula's arrival. And Fisher builds sequences in parallel action, converging into a shot that binds these two actions together into one frame. Now, the acting by all parties concerned is nothing less than impeccable. Dracula, remember the horror of Dracula for its U.S. title, is among the greatest vampire films ever made, and makes tons of money, not only in England, but in America and all over the world. Hammer is eager to do a sequel to Dracula, but Christopher Lee refuses to play Dracula again because Lee fears that he will become typecast just like Bela Lugosi was as the Count. So the next Hammer vampire Dracula film, The Brides of Dracula, 1960, will star Peter Cushing only. So Hammer decides to do a sequel to The Curse of Frankenstein instead. This is The Revenge of Frankenstein.